And speaking of which, US is doing containment, as much as they
Yeah.
can. So the
Mm,
latest one is the US will ban outbound investments in China's
mm,
semiconductors,
mm.
quantum technologies, and AI. So from
Yeah.
January 2nd. I think this is executive order that has been issued by Biden some time
Mm,
ago, but now it's finalized. So the
yeah.
Treasury Department, I think they got out some detailed rules about this. So that's the one thing. But I always feel like these kind of thing, I can see why they do that, but at the same time, again, I feel this could also potentially hurt the dollar because these are investment. We're talking about dollar investments. So I always feel like the best way to protect dollar is to make dollar available and convenient for people to use. But when you say you cannot invest here, you cannot invest that, you limit dollars investment, isn't it?
That's exactly correct. That's exactly what you're doing. You are, again, using the dollar as a mechanism for international economic war.
Mhm. Mhm.
You are, in fact, waging economic war because this is what this is all about, trying to block the development of China's semiconductor industry. It's ultimately, it's not even containment in the end. It is economic warfare.
Oh,
And then you are horrified and astonished that people no longer trust your currency anymore and
yeah.
won't trade with you and look for ways to develop other global systems and trading systems to try and avoid you. But that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, but but they will continue to do so. I think they will continue even
Absolutely no.
yeah, even though it doesn't make any sense. But
Yeah.
because it's not going to stop the investment in China. I mean, China has money, and you do can use other currencies to buy things when you're talking about investment, right? So I don't see how that can be really
Well,
hurting China, right?
it
So
is not going to hurt China. It is going to stimulate development of a further branch of the Chinese economy in a way that the United States, in the end, is going to struggle to compete with. I mean, that's what it's going to do. I
mm,
mean, all you have to look is at the scale. I mean, China has greater investment opportunities, great
mm,
investment resources than the United States does. This is something, by the way, the Americans find very difficult to understand because up to now, in any given situation, they've always been able to outspend someone, whoever it is they're up against. But China can actually outspend them if it must, and and this it will. And of course, China has far greater industrial and technological resources and at least equivalent scientific ones.
mm,
So, I mean, they'll be able to do this, and they'll be able to do this very fast.
mm.
By 2030, we'll be looking at a completely different situation.
The other thing, is also I think related to US, even though this is
Mm,
Switzerland. So the Bank of International Settlement, BIS,
mm,
is now considering shutting down its Enbridge project.
mm,
Enbridge is a CBDC, right? The central
mm,
bank direct currency exchange
mm,
mechanism. Well, what's interesting is, first of all, the whole thing, I think it was reportedly so, the way they reported is so wrong. So, like MSN, this is how they describing this situation. They said, well, Vladimir Putin's Enbridge under fire, BIS weighs shutting down BRICS threat to dollar. I don't think Enbridge has anything to do with Putin. He didn't set it up.
no,
It was China, Thailand, and UAE's central bank and Hong Kong. And I think this year Saudi joined for mainly for CBDC
mm,
exchange. The only thing related to that from BRICS side is BRICS is thinking have some kind of BRICS bridge similar to mBridge,
mm,
but it's
yeah,
not Putin's mBridge at all.
no,
So
no.
here's my question. Now, Bank of International Settlements, BIS, is a bank for central banks around the
Yeah.
world. So it's a very,
Mm.
very important bank, and it's part of the Switzerland, banking industry. Why do they do something like that to discredit themselves? When you do something like that, people can no longer trust you, isn't it?
You are absolutely correct, and it's incredibly wrong and it's incredibly stupid. Even during the Second World War, the BIS continued to function with American and German representatives. So I mean, the German and American central banks and the British central bank were all working in BIS during the Second World War, because that was what the BIS saw its role as being in those days. It was completely neutral. It functioned in Switzerland. Its responsibility was to the um, global financial system. It was not going to work on behalf of one side or another. But today, it's different. I mean, Swiss neutrality, I think, has almost gone up in smoke, if I have to be honest, which is a tragedy and a great shame from many points of view. I mean, people can be scornful and mocking of the Swiss in the past, and there can be all kinds of cynical things said about them. But I think Swiss neutrality overall had a good role to play. And I have personal reasons for thinking that, by the way, which I don't want to discuss in this program. But that's all gone. They've clearly been leaned on by the Americans to close this down. And let me repeat again, they may talk about Putin, but ultimately it is always China that is at the core of everything. And all that's going to happen now is that, as we saw in Kazan, they're busy setting up an alternative, as of course they can.
Yeah. Yeah, instead of in the future, if they want to set up things like that, instead of doing that in the BIS, they probably would do it in Shanghai and Hong Kong,
Yeah.
those sort of places. Yeah, more
Well, that's
reliable
right.
places. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And that's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Another thing, talking about Switzerland, the neutrality thing, is that they also signed a European Sky Shield initiative. Now, they always say it's for defense, right? They always say that, but fundamentally, it's a military alliance. So I mean, I think in April, we talked about this. In April, the Swiss People's Party, SVP, they actually, I think, submitted a referendum request. They want to have a referendum about the Switzerland's neutrality. Clearly, for the SVP, they feel strongly they want to have continuing the neutrality policy. So that's why they have this. They want to have a referendum to put in constitution what you can or cannot do being a neutral country. I don't know what happened with that. I can't find anything about this referendum, whether it happened or not. Probably haven't happened. But in any event, well, this is going on, supposedly a referendum is going to happen. The current Switzerland administration just doing everything totally abandon this neutrality policies now, isn't it?
This is exactly correct. That's exactly what they're doing. Now, I haven't heard about this referendum. I heard that there were proposals for a referendum, but I'm going to make a prediction. It will never happen, even if most people in Switzerland want it. And the reason it will never happen is because the Swiss people remain deeply committed to Swiss neutrality. But of course, their political class no longer is. The political class conceives of itself as very much part of the collective West, and they will resist any attempt to hold a referendum that will constrain in any way what Switzerland is going to do. And the thing about Switzerland is, of course, the political class of Switzerland still claims that Switzerland is neutral. They still want to preserve the form of neutrality while stripping all the content away. But the Russians have already straightforwardly said that they no longer think of Switzerland as a neutral country. And I think it's before long most countries in the world will come to the same view.
Yeah, I think this referendum actually is the party, the SVP, they want to continue this policy. So they want the people to have a referendum so that people show their support for the neutrality so that they can limit the government, what they can or cannot do, being a neutral country. I think that's the purpose of this.
I know, absolutely. So, and then, and the reason it's not going to happen is because if it did happen, the people would support this referendum. So for that reason, they're going to prevent it. And you can already see what they're going to say. As I said, the political class says we're neutral anyway. So why do we need this referendum?
Yeah. that's probably what is going on right now, because they
Yeah.
submitted in April and we don't see anything,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
because nobody want to follow up and nobody want it to
Yeah.
happen. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's probably what's going on. Yeah. Well, but then again, my question is this, like, Switzerland is doing this to undermine its own credibility, its own very important
Mm.
sector, the banking sector, right? And it's not that long ago, ASML, which is a Dutch company, sanctioned China based on what US asked them to do, also hurting itself. And of course, you're just talking about Germany doing all sort of a self-destructive
Mm.
things. why why can't they get together? I understand they are small, like Switzerland and Holland, they are smaller countries, but why don't
Mm.
they get together with Germany and have a good conversation with the United States? Because these things are not just putting tariffs on something, Chinese goods. These are undermining their fundamental country's core businesses. So it's vital for them to resist, right? So if they cannot resist, why don't they get together and have a good conversation with the US, saying, you see, you ask us to do these things that is hurting us and it's not necessarily helping you in the long run. But nobody want to take the lead to have that
No.
conversation. But
You've asked me a question, and it's a question that brings up the sort of sense of despair I have in Europe. The only way I can explain it is that we have a political class that isn't just in Switzerland and Netherlands and whatever, but it's a European political class, which has now become very, very rigid in its thinking,
mhm,
and which has become very, very, it feels very much connected to the American project. And they see anything like that as a kind of betrayal of the overall idealistic Western collectivist project. I think the thing to say about this is that for every Gerhard Schroeder that there might be in Germany, and in the political system, and this reproduces itself right across the entire political system in Europe now. For every Gerhard Schroeder, there are 20 Annalena Baerbocks. And that is what one has to face. So you come up against people like that all the time. And they have this very powerful demagogic language that they use. And of course, it's backed strongly by a very, very powerful Atlanticist media. Putin made an absolutely valid point, by the way, which is that in pretty much every single important media outlet in Europe today, if
mhm,
you drill down far enough, you will find an American NGO or think tank or business person or entity that ultimately puts up the money and decides the line that should be followed. And they will always say, if you deviate, if you don't agree to follow these sanctions, you are supporting China, you are undermining the West, you're siding with the autocrats against the Democrats. All this, all these. All this stupid narrative that has
mhm,
been imposed on us, but which some of these people do believe in. I think that's the other thing to say. I mean, for them, it's they see it as somehow immoral
mhm,
to actually conduct trade and business in that kind of way. Again, I'm more familiar with the Russian side, but Russian officials have said, and I've heard this. They said in private discussions that one of the major problems they have talking to Western, to European officials now, is that whenever they do, it's quite obvious that the European officials hate them. I mean, when you are faced with that, what can you do?
yeah. Yeah, they hate Russia and they are not comfortable with China.
Yeah,
You see, that's
China,
the I
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
So that yeah, when you have that kind of emotional,
yeah,
people are very emotional, right? That there are lots of
yeah,
the people are not very logical, not
mm,
analytical. They're very emotional. Yeah.
yeah.
So um here is here talking about media. So Reuters has this article about what's going to happen with the North Korea troops. Okay, I find it fascinating. Here's what it says. It says, no new limits on Ukraine's use of U.S. weapons if North Korea enters fight, Pentagon says.
Yeah.
So it took me a while to try to figure out what it's trying to say. What it's actually trying to say is, even though North Korea join the fight, we are still going to hold whatever the limit we have for our weapons, what you can or cannot do. That's actually what it is trying to say, isn't it? It's which
Yes.
actually is not what Ukraine
Yes.
want to hear. Is
Yes.
that what it
Yes.
is?
You're absolutely correct. I mean, this is exactly an example of the way in which language is being abused in the West, because in fact, I mean, the key word that's inserted in that sentence is "new." You're the
Yeah.
only person, by the way, that has really noticed this that I'm aware of. But the point is that what they're basically saying is that the presence of the North Koreans is going to change anything
Mhm.
in the way in which the Western acts. They're not going to introduce restrictions above those restrictions which exist already.
Yeah. Which I thought that Ukraine would say, "Oh, you see, the North Korean are coming in. Now we
Yeah,
can use your weapon for this and that." But the Pentagon
yeah,
essentially saying no, right? That's what this
exactly,
is about. But when you read it,
exactly.
it took me a while to figure out what it's
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
say.
yes,
I
yes.
find it very interesting.